Folks, welcome inside the Parisi Palace, high above 3773 East Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show, coming to you on Power Talk. Thank you so much for making us part of your day today. And a lot of times on this journey over the last 11 years, I have to oftentimes step back and remain humble and recognize that there are so many people that have created on this palette of and this lexicon of great American music. And this morning I woke up and checked my inbox for my email, and amidst the junk and the spam came the birthdays of my Facebook friends. And I noticed that one of them is my next guest. And I said, Mike is somebody, my guest is somebody who really has carved a unique and singular path in music and in production, in arrangement, and his own albums as a leader. And to me, that's ultimately the definition of success in life. It has nothing to do with the amount of commodities you have or the toys that you have or the bottom line, but it's how can you cut above the morass of what everybody else is doing in your niche, in your field. And Mike has kept stride piano alive for a long time. He's produced iconic, in my mind, some really amazing albums that definitely bordered on rock and fusion, always bringing in the heaviest cats, getting a chance to play with Elvin Jones, and knowing a lot of the Dixieland cats who, at the end of the day, according to Roger Kellaway, were the most unpretentious cats. Looking to find more knowledge. Mike Lipskin, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you. If I may edit a little bit of your very flattering introduction, what most people like myself are not trying, we hope maybe to get enough gigs and be somewhat successful in the terms, but success can mean many things. But with my case, since I was, I guess, preteen, I wanted to learn to play stride jazz piano. I call it stride jazz piano because some of the ignorant people post-bop don't think it's a jazz piano style. And they've never listened to Art Tatum, Fats Waller, James P. Johnson, Donald Lambert, Errol Garner, who doesn't really play stride anymore, but he could, and he did years ago. Anyway, that's a little bit of my editing of your introduction. Also, it's very important. It's always been important to me to try to keep the essence of the style alive, especially when these days there are less and less people who even know what it is. At the end of the wonderful Ray Charles movie of a few years ago, they are playing very simple country boogie style, which is a sort of a quasi-folk style, and they call it stride piano. And it's about 180 degrees from stride, just as you wouldn't call Wagner in the Baroque era, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and I'm going to sit here and plead. Well, anyway, can you talk about the elements, not getting too deep in the weeds, but as it relates to the stride, would you have a traditional rhythm section? What makes it a jazz form?
Basically, it's a jazz form because it involves improvisation. There's some people who transcribe James P. Johnson or Fats Waller piano solos note for note. And because they're doing that, it loses, and they're transcribing into sheet music, loses the essence of the style, which involves a subtle juxtaposition between the right and the left hand in terms of time and rhythm, and very varied chord patterns, passing chords, and varied left hand devices within that style. You have to. It's like a language. You have to spend a few years playing within the style and learning it. If students come to me and they say, Well, which is more important, and what are the exact notes I play in the left hand, and on the bottom, the 2 and 4s? When you have to think of that, then you can't play it.
Totally.
You have to play it enough so that you're doing it as like second nature. I once asked Dick Hyman, who's an old friend, close friend.
Great cat.
I don't read well at all, but he could read incredibly fast. I used to see, when I was a producer at RCA, I'd see him come into a session. Maybe he'd be a little bit late, and he'd sit down while they were just about to make a take, and he'd be able to play the sheet in front of him flawlessly. So I said, "How do you do that so fast?" He says, "I look about 2 or 3 or 4 bars ahead."
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so why do you think that? I mean, do you believe? I believe that any music. I mean, you've been a big fan of my show and big supporter and commenting a lot on my posts, and I believe that any music is danceable. I mean, the Fourth Way, which I'm not sure if you ever got hip to them, was Eddie Marshall, Mike Knock, Ron McClure, and Michael White, and they have a song called "Dance of the Mechanical Men," and it's like totally like in like modern era, like it's EDM, electric dance music, like it's so perfect, and yet it's still danceable. And I just wonder if you believe, is stride piano, especially within the context of a conversation with other people on the bandstand, is it dance music?
Well, of course it's dance music. Every 400 records that Fats Waller made, you after the title you see the letters FT, meaning Foxtrot. These were before bop. In fact, it was when bop came in, there was a derogatory phrase about pre-bop music, calling it dance music, and the bop people and the bop heads said, "We don't play for the audience. We don't play bop music. We don't play dance music." That was contradicted by wonderful Dizzy Gillespie and James Moody when they would dance around on the stage. And because Dizzy Gillespie came from Fats Waller, he admitted that Fats was his humor idol. And
wow.
my greatest compliment is wherever I play, because I've tried to develop James P. Johnson's beat or Fats's beat, is people getting up and wanting to dance without anybody saying anything and without my having a drummer or a bass player. Along those lines, there's a big problem because there are less and less drummers and bass players who can play pre-bop swing style, which is what I need behind me and what Fats Waller had. You mentioned Elvin Jones. That was one of my first albums, and it was produced by Bob Thiel, who was a friend and a great historic producer. But he had Elvin Jones play with me, which was completely wrong because Elvin Jones is a modern drummer. He should have given me Sonny Greer or Joe Jones, Papa Joe Jones, who would have been absolutely brilliant. But Elvin Jones did really not know how to play that style at all. It was for me, my point, it was a rhythmic disaster.
You had no creative control over who you could bring in on the trap set?
No, he chose the studio and he chose the musicians, except I did bring in Willie the Lion Smith and my old friend Stan Montero, who was a great reed player. And that part of it was fun, and I also chose the material, the songs.
Mike, this is so important because I mean, you're still not only here, you're incredibly you're still with it and playing, and you got everything together. I mean, you've been on this earth quite a while. Explain why Greer and Papa Joe had that. What kind of chops do you need to play in a pre-bop rhythm section?
You need to have learned the language, grow up in that era of the different type of beat, where you're just a little bit, you're relaxed. You're not what I call digital. Once you got into the closest thing to it is maybe a Motown rhythm section.
Wow.
And that sort of thing. Because again, Motown is dance music too. And this was, but post-bop isn't. It's more intellectual. And the drummers are much too busy. There's one drummer who should remain nameless in the Bay Area, and I once wanted to hire him. He's a wonderful person and a very fine drummer, but he's post-bop, and I gave him about 10 Fats Waller records, and I said, please just play brushes like this. He was able to do it for I'd say about 15 minutes of the gig, and then he went into being too busy.
Wow.
Yeah. And so it's more a relaxed style, and it's having been imbued in the style and growing up with it.
That's what I'm.
When
I
I
guess
played
what
with Sonny Greer.
Yeah, no, because Greer. I mean,
Greer,
yeah. Go ahead.
What?
No. I mean, I think it's. You mentioned two amazing cats that I look at, Papa Joe and Sonny, and I just wonder where they came from. I mean, what I'm used to is seeing Sonny in Count Basie's band, backing up Teresa Brewer. I mean, you might have even produced those albums. I don't even know.
Sonny Greer was with Ellington.
So where
Joe Jones was with the earlier Basie bands, and he was I think he was the drummer on Billie Holiday's records. I'm not sure.
Did they? So what was the language in your mind before Stride? What was that language that led into that sort of Stride language?
Well, again, it's dance music, and the Stride jazz style has an underpinning of a certain beat, which is the type of beat for foxtrots and that sort of dancing. It's a feel that you have to hear. You can't. If you try to describe it in technical terms or analytical terms, you miss the whole essence. I'll give you an example. When I wanted to get a beat or a feel on a record, when I was producing at RCA, I wouldn't hire an arranger to write it out. I would simply take the 45 RPM disco or whatever I wanted to feel, and I would play it to the musicians in the studio. They would pick it up in half a second.
Say that again. Say that one more time. That's fascinating.
The way I would get the musicians in the studio, the professional ones that you'd hire in New York or L.A., the way I'd say, I want this feel, and I'd bring in a hit 45 by some group, a Motown group or a fusion group or a disco group, and I'd say, can you do this? And because they were so professional, they got it. All I had to do was play maybe 30 seconds of the record, and then I'd turn it off, and the guitar, bass, and drums would pick it up flawlessly.
Wow.
And they would also do it with swing because they weren't subject to reading complicated double staff sheet music.
Wow. I mean, to me, it's like when you look at the essence of Dizzy and Moody, Bird, those guys. Is there an element of Stride? And I'm just asking as a journalist and a patron of the arts and not a musician. But were they incorporating that Stride language into their?
Not at all.
Not at all. But yet they came
not even
from
one note of it.
Right.
But no, they didn't come from it. They started at the last days of swing. My personal favorite era of tenor and alto is just before the 50s when bop came in, where you had geniuses like Chewberry and, of course, the king, the idol, Lester Young. To me, these people were just giants. And Charlie Parker was a kid then. He came up in that. He was even in the, I think he was in the Jay McShann band in Kansas City. In fact, he was. I know that. So they came at the end of swing. So they were a little bit influenced by it. They didn't become as analytical as some of the other musicians, or say Monk or Miles. But in a subtle way, it helped them. I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
And I heard a duet with Dizzy Gillespie and Wynton Marsalis playing together. Now, I am not denigrating Wynton Marsalis, who's wonderful. He's a great arranger. He's a great figure in jazz, and I'm glad he is as successful as he is. But I heard Dizzy do a solo, and I heard Wynton Marsalis do a solo. I think Wynton was 20, 30 years younger than Dizzy, something like that. Now, Wynton didn't grow up in that swing era, so he didn't have what I call the dotted eighth feeling in his solos. He also was classically trained, and unfortunately, and I envy that. I love classical music,
Sure.
and I wish I could play it, and I wish I could read it. But if you study that for too long as a kid, you're going to play more precisely. You won't bend the rhythm the way Dizzy Gillespie or Billy Taylor, who was should be more praised, the pianist.
Absolutely, Dr. Billy, man.
Yeah, he had that. He had that ability, even though he was playing bop and he was getting very busy. He had what we call the dotted eighth feeling. So he was, in a way, he was swinging. But they would do it. Stride is a specific thing. If you want to hear the element of stride, you just have to listen to Fats Waller band records, and that's it right there. Or James P. Johnson. It's the beat that you're going to listen to.
And you would say that the most proficient drummers, is it just in their minds they can't? It's almost too simple for them. They automatically get too busy. I'm talking about modern.
It's not a very good question, but it's not too simple. It's compare it to dialects of when people talk. Compare the difference between the way the Bavarian Germans speak compared to the Berlin Germans.
Totally, yeah.
Or I think to a certain extent, Sicilian versus Rome is the same sort of difference. These are osmotic differences that are created by the environment you grow up in. It's as simple as that. You can't quantify it. The reason the modern bop drummers and post-bop cannot play as subtle and brilliantly as Sonny Greer or Papa Joe Jones or Sid Catlett it's just simply they were born in another era.
Huh.
Now, they could learn it if they wanted to, but there's no reason for them to because they're well-versed. Now, by the same token, Papa Joe Jones, and I don't call him Papa Joe Jones. I played with him, and to me, he was Joe Jones.
I love it.
He wasn't Papa, and he was funny.
Yeah, for so many of the fusion cats, he was like a father figure. But go ahead, yeah.
Really, I don't.
I mean, I just know like Papa. I mean, to them, like was it?
Well, there was Danny Joe Jones.
No, but Danny Serafin, who was in Chicago, the drummer. I mean, when he got to take lessons with Papa Joe, he was like 20 years younger, and it was like a dream come true. Anyway, I'm just saying, like, you played with him. He was your friend. You knew him as Joe Jones. Can you talk about like were you up in Harlem playing with him? I mean, that must have been amazing.
Well, what happened was, by the time I was 13 or 14, my parents allowed me to take the subway from Queens, New York. I'd met Willie the Lion Smith, so every other weekend I'd go up and hang out with him. And then I hung out with him and Lucky Roberts and UV Blake,
Wow.
Cliff Jackson, Donald Lambert. Cliff Jackson and Donald Lambert are much less known, but they were great stride jazz pianists.
Wow.
And I hung out with them when I was a teenager. And you're going to love this. I would take the subway to 155th Street and walk down to 151st Street and 8th Avenue, where Willie lived in one of those walk-up big apartments. And the streets were silent because this is the 50s. It was before transistor radios and boom boxes. So there were no boom boxes in the street.
God, it's like Victrolas
in
the basement.
Quiet.
Yeah, unbelievable.
Yeah. The whole thing, it was very quiet during the day. Now, of course, on a Saturday night, people would turn the radio up or, that sort of thing. But walking during the day, it was silent in Harlem. Isn't that amazing?
Well, it's kind of cool. It speaks to, if you just go back and listen to, you mentioned Lester Young or Coleman Hawkins and how just so beautiful and lilting it was a reflection of that urban center. It was just not as busy. It was not as loud. It wasn't nothing compared to what it is.
Well, it was acoustic. They didn't.
Right.
You only had an amp. You had an amp for the vocalist, but they projected. You didn't have amps in the Ellington and Basie band. Later on, you may have had a guitar and you may have mic'd the guitar, but if you look at those old pictures, you don't see any pickups or guitar amps either.
No, it's just the natural stage sound. It's the best feeling ever. So you're going in and you're hanging with six stride piano. Can you just talk about kind of being a kid in a candy store and what that must have been? I mean, I remember Callaway.
Well,
go ahead.
What it was I taught myself to play. I didn't learn so much from them by watching them play and trying to memorize their finger moves and all that.
Right.
But I hung out with them, and what happened was they invited me into a world of black history, social history. Willie would tell these incredible stories, and the other ones too, about what it was like to be in bars in Harlem in the 30s, and their parents, and the whole thing.
Can you talk about that? I mean, what was? Can you tell me one story? I've just never. This is like totally new territory.
These are the types of stories they would tell me.
Yeah.
Cliff Jackson said, I saved Willie the Lion's life because he could be rather cutting. He could be insulting.
Yeah.
We were at this bar, and some cat pulled out a butcher's knife because Willie had insulted him too much.
Oh.
And I separated them, and Willie left the bar. That's the type of thing they would talk about, and how they could imitate Willie the Lion's mannerisms. And after a while, that's how I got in the record business, by recording all these people on old tube 7.5-inch tape machines, and they. Eventually, I got so that when I would be interviewing them, because they were old enough, I'd get them wrapped up in the narrative, and they'd forget they were being recorded. So they'd get really relaxed, And UV would start telling me, well, do you remember, and he's talking about something that happened in 1920. And then he looks at me, but you weren't even born then, because I'd lulled him into thinking that I knew enough by having studied and talking to them, that they accepted me almost as a contemporary, which was such an honor.
It's so beautiful. I mean, I mean, to me, like, what was there a lifestyle associated here? Did you know this? So I interviewed George Braith a while ago, and he said that this is what he said. He goes, growing up in the Bronx, all the guys lived right in the back of my house. Charlie Parker used to play with this guy. Did you ever know a guy named Fats Noel? He weighed about 450 pounds, so he did
Oh
not come out of
God,
the
no,
house. Milt Jackson used to
no.
come there. So did Kenny Durham. Bud Powell came there with Thelonious and Elmo Hope. I didn't know who
Yeah,
they
well,
were.
that's all post Bob.
That's all. That's
Bob.
that's Bob. Yeah, no. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, so.
I'm talking about stuff earlier.
And we're talking about like what, mid 40s, early 40s?
Well, I went up in the 50s, but by when I met Lucky Roberts, Willie the Lion, Eubie Blake, these people were in their, well, Eubie was already in the 70s,
Wow.
but these people were in their 60s, and Bob had passed them by. They didn't get as many gigs. One of the reasons, in a way, I was lucky because they're sitting at home. So here's this young kid who wants to learn all about them, and they became like second fathers to me. Also, I kept them from being bored. I'd go over there and just hang out with them, and I'd fix their radios or lamps, because I was handy that way.
I love that.
Electricity.
Oh man.
Yeah. In fact, I'm proud. I once fixed Lawrence Brown's radio.
So I mean, wait, you were how old I mean, you basically
teenager.
Right. You had learned, though you were 13 in 1940. Is that right?
13 when I started.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
What year were you 13 years old?
Let's see. It's 42, 52, 55. 1955.
55. Okay.
56, yeah.
Okay. So basically, when did the light bulb go on that you wanted to start recording these guys? And was it kind of an Alan Lomaxian kind of thing? Not that you were out in the fields, but that you weren't necessarily aligned.
That's funny. I love that.
You weren't aligned with a record company when you first started recording them, though.
No. But ironically, when I did join RCA in 1964, my boss, Steve Scholes, the legendary Steve Scholes, had been in the field recording. That's a whole other story.
Wait, I need to know.
Question.
First of all, I just want to stop you right there.
I always wanted to.
I just want to know, before we go any farther, what is your birthday?
It's you mean what year I was born?
No, the actual date and the year. Yeah.
The reason I don't say that anymore is because of ID theft.
That's right. Okay, I just want to be very clear, though. The reason I thought you were older than you are is because Wikipedia, for what it's worth, says you were born March 8th, 1927.
Well, I put that in there.
And then and then the reason we're talking is because it's Lipskin's quote unquote birthday today. Anyway, that's not even a big deal. I just wanted.
No, it doesn't matter. By the way, it was 1827, not 1927.
Dude, I was like, this is going to be the deepest hang. All right, so who was this cat that was doing field recordings before you?
Oh no, but he worked for RCA Records. That's the way country, the Carter family. And I reissued a lot of those historic recordings. They'd take wax lathes, tube amplifiers, and what they call weight-driven turntables. And can you imagine driving pre-interstate highway down to North Carolina from Camden, New Jersey, with all this heavy equipment, and setting up in a hotel and recording Jimmy Rogers or recording the Carter family, or various legendary, or Robert Johnson for that matter. And there was a legendary producer named Frank Walker in the 20s, and he eventually worked at RCA later on, and Steve Scholes reported to him. But these people travel all over to record unknowns. They'd pay them $50 a session or something, and a lot of these records are the masters are still available, and a lot of them have been reissued over the years. And it's just an incredible American history technology. And, it's so easy now technologically to make very good sounding records compared to what they had then. So can you imagine having to carry all this equipment?
I agree, but there's
miles?
something very sterile about miking every single piece of the drum kit. I find the modern technology almost unlistenable. I really do. I love leakage. I love the natural sound. I
agree with you.
I really don't. The idea.
Part of the reason with the modern stuff is we used to have an expression: too many microphones is bad as not enough. Because if you have too many microphones, you're encouraging what is called phase cancellation. So what you're hearing is there are two things that you're hearing you didn't have in the old days. You're hearing this cancellation of different microphones.
Right.
If they're not placed right, or we used to dip some of them sometimes. I worked with a group called Lighthouse, and
I wanted to skip Propec. I don't know how that happened. Yeah. How the heck did that happen?
Well, they were at RCA, and they didn't have a producer, so I got to work with them, and he insisted on having these microphones. He'd have one under the tom and one on the top, and what that does is that it's a prima facie cancellation of 180 degrees. So what we would do is, he didn't know it, but when we mixed down, we'd have the bottom mic dead. We'd mute it.
No, but see, in today's world, he would go in. Well, maybe that cat would go in and demand that you turn that mic on. Like, I mean, the point is that I got to go back and listen to that. They made a bunch of records.
They did. Their hits were with, I think it was Jimmy Einer who produced them for another record company.
Yeah, they were on this label called Evolution. But then you took them in.
No, I didn't. I was first at RCA before Evolution, I think.
I want to just be clear about something, though.
Why should we be clear about?
No, I mean, this is so. I mean, because we're bopping around, literally.
I know.
I'm having a ball. No, the thing is, so you're fixing the Stride Cats' radios. You're hanging. You're getting to know them. But then, like, when did you recognize that there was really that these guys were completely under-recorded? I mean, was there any viable? I sound naive here.
I'll tell you how it happened for me. By the time I was 12 or 13, and I wanted to get as many stride jazz recordings as I could to learn the style, to learn the language. Right. At that time, there was still only 78s. So I worked for a guy, and he paid me in 78s. And so I started, I got my first Pentron tape recorder, and I started transferring the 78s to 7.5-inch, 7-inch reels, 7.5 IPS, inches per second. And then naturally I said, well, I want to preserve these 78s. And when I started meeting these guys, I'd bring these tape recorders up there because I knew instinctively they're not going to be around forever. So I wanted to record them for posterity. It's archive. In that way, it was like Lomax. I wasn't working for a record company. I instinctively knew that my tapes are not going to sell like Chuck Berry.
Absolutely. No, I get it, man. This is a serious it's a musical dig, yeah.
Archive. I thought I was making archive recordings.
You were?
Yeah, of course. In fact, a lot of them, I've digitalized them and I've issued them. I have a whole pile of them. I can Dropbox you sometime. We can talk about that later.
Yeah, man, I can't wait. Anyway, so he paid you and you would bring up the equipment, and then basically they'd get on some grand piano. I mean, can you talk about a seminal?
No, they'd be in their apartment, or they'd come to my house, my parents' house. They had a nice house in Kew Gardens, and they had a Steinway. So they'd come, and then they'd play, and I'd record them there, too.
Wow, that is awesome.
I'll never forget. Lucky Roberts honored me so much because he was an old man by then. He took the subway from his house down to from Convent Avenue in Harlem, which is 3 trains to in those days IND subway and that sort of thing, to Kew Gardens, Queens. And I met him at the subway, and we walked all the way up to my parents' house, and we had a long lunch, and he played piano and gave me a lesson and stuff like that. But to do all that, to come out to, now that I think of it, what an honor.
So beautiful, man. It's really, it's really, I grew up in Stony Brook, and my grandparents lived in Queens and then moved down to near NYU, and I can really feel their presence here today, because that is the kind of, you talk about this amazing musician who goes out of his way to take public transportation, come down to the house. It's just,
yeah, and he's old,
not young. I mean, this is so interesting. So, like, just fill in the blanks, because I even though I come across as maybe knowing a lot, I don't really know anything. And the reality is that did these guys, Willie the Lion Smith, Jackson, how were there places for these cats to play?
Yes, yeah, they did get. Sorry to interrupt, but I can answer you. They, partially due to my pushing them and other people, they were, and there were older people that recognized their musical worth, so they would get gigs. Lucky wouldn't get as many as Willie, but Willie even made I think 2 European tours, one in 49 and one in 50 something or 60, and he'd go to Canada. And George Wein would employ him at the Newport Jazz Festival.
That's beautiful. So I know about like what was there? I mean, because you listen, you think about at a certain point, you had this, again, this is going into the 60s, but you had Small's Paradise, you had the Club Baron. Were there distinctive clubs in Harlem where you could go and see 3 sets of Willie the Lion Smith on a Saturday?
No, that was dead. He wouldn't get booked in Harlem. I'll tell you where.
Explain why he wouldn't get booked in Harlem.
He beats me. I don't know.
Wow.
I'll tell you. Part of the reason was, by that time, it wasn't black bar owners in Harlem that would hire him. It was the white people downtown. Jack Crystal, who was Billy Crystal's father, was he loved the old jazz. He had Commodore Music Shop, and he and Milt Gabler had Commodore Records.
Wow. Where was that located? Where was that located?
42nd. It was 42nd Street, a block west, I think, of Grand Central Station.
Unbelievable.
But Jack Crystal on Friday nights and Saturday nights would have jazz at the Central Plaza, and I was too young, so my father would take, liquor law. My father started taking me there when I was 13. I would stand. Willie allowed me to stand next to the piano. Willie's playing with Walter Page, Joe Jones, Gene Cedric, Charlie Shavers, and these incredible, to me, jazz history. Now, I got to tell you a side story, which is so funny. During a break, because I had 2 bands. The other band was Conrad Janis with Dick Wellstud playing piano and some other great musicians. Anyway, we're sitting in the back, Charlie Shavers, Willie, myself, and Cecil Scott, who was an old reed player. And they're trying to think out what they should play next set. None of them can think of any tunes. Now, you got 400 collective years of people who've been playing, say 40 years each. So 3, that's 120 years, and none of them can think of a tune.
Do you think
As
that?
a
Do you think that?
result,
Do you think that maybe they just couldn't think of a tune that would get them off? They've been kind of bored of everything, all the standards.
oh no, no. It was when you get older, you can't think.
Oh, I see.
That's
You say the
why
memory the memory. Yeah.
wherever I play, because of that rule when I was so young, I carry two sheets of paper with very small print of about 500 tunes.
Just so you
Wherever I
remember
play.
that time, man. They couldn't remember any tunes.
Oh yeah, because if I don't have them,
Hmm.
I've gotten to the point where I have in my mind the Cole Porter, Ellington, Gershwin, Waller, Rogers and Hart repertoire. But when you're, suppose I'm interviewing you and I'm asking something. Suppose I say, can you give me a list of 10 guests that you've had in the last 20 years, or the locations? You'll have to think for a minute.
Sure.
Yeah, suppose I'm interviewing you and asking you for a series of facts or tunes, records. You might be able to come up with a few, but if you were prepared and you have a list of autobiographical stuff, or that, it would be a lot easier for you to rattle them off.
Just going back for a minute. I mean, like where did the big bands were so popular in the 40s. For some reason, the Four Brothers keep coming into my mind, but I just like, and they were playing big ballrooms. That was also considered dance music, but
Absolutely.
you don't. You feel like in some ways that these amazing spiritual musicians playing stride, it wasn't the hip thing anymore, so they couldn't get a gig in the blackest. I mean, that was the
Bob had taken over. That was the fads had passed them by. A guy who was older than me and was lucky. One of my great disappointments in life was that James P. Johnson died a year before I even knew who he was in 1955. Anyway, it was so bad that he even got a gig playing on a 66-note piano in a bar.
Oh my God!
Now this was one of the pioneers. He wrote hit songs. He had hit Broadway musical reviews. If it wasn't for him, Vance Waller, Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Art Tatum, all these other people would have sounded very different. But like Brand, Brand gets thrown out. Cars, styles.
Totally, yeah.
Yeah.
Bop had come in and was
we're culturally America's a cultural throwaway society.
Totally.
Yeah.
I mean, did it have anything?
So wait a second. I didn't finish with the.
Do it.
Jack Crystal every Friday and Saturday he would be one of the few people that would hire people like Willie the Lion and Walter Page and Gene Cedric and these other people, and he'd do that. He did that for a number of years. It was wonderful.
That is so hip. Who were the seminal? I'm going to throw out a couple names, but we talked about Joe Jones and Sonny Greer and Sid Catlett. What about Oscar Pettiford or Milt Hinton? Who were the guys that could play really good? What does it require to play upright with stride music?
It requires.
Just to be clear, Chuck Rainey was playing an electric bass on your album on Flying Dutchman.
Yeah, and he was very unfortunate because he also was not used to playing with that style. It was a complete mismatch that when I became a producer, I didn't do.
Are you not happy with that album? Because I thought I
always... No, well, I'm not happy with my playing because most artists aren't happy with their playing.
Sure.
But the reason I'm not happy with the rhythm section is because it was a musical non sequitur.
Totally.
Yeah.
Only talking to you now, does that add up? Because I kind of freaked out when I saw that album. because, and I guess Theo, who I admire and respect. I mean,
Me too.
I'm turning 44 next month, but I can honestly say that Bob Thiel was one of the guys that got me into burning spiritual music because he was doing all this incredible stuff with Chico Hamilton. I don't need to tell you this stuff, but when I saw that Flying Dutchman album, I said, this is an intoxicating combination, but it's nice to actually hear from it was a total non sequitur. Those guys, and I just feel like maybe he was doing it to sort of give it some sort of contemporary feel, which was totally against not the point of the album.
Well, Bob was not, I don't think Bob was a musician. Now, you have to remember, Bob came from some money, and before me, he had a label in the 40s called Signature Records, and he recorded James P. Johnson. He recorded him just after Fats Waller died. James P. did a thing called Blues for Fats, and then on the other side, he did one of his own originals. But Thiel, early on, realized the historic nature of jazz. The other one who did was Nesui Ertegun, Ahmet Ertegun's brother, who was a good friend of mine too.
Wow.
These people in those days loved jazz, and they got in the record business to record for almost archive purposes. That's how I got in the record business, doing tapes of Donald Lambert and trying to interest John Hammond at Columbia or Brad McEwen at RCA in them, which was stupid. They were badly recorded. And again, stride piano, to answer your earlier question, stride jazz piano went out of favor as soon as you had a big band, with bass, drums, and guitars. For instance, that's why Count Basie very wisely used Fats Waller's right hand. He could play stride very well, but he didn't with the band at all, because he had Freddie Green, a fantastic rhythm guitar player, and then Walter Page and Joe Jones. Now, you say you're 44.
Yeah, I'm 43.
I'm amazed that you know about this stuff. A lot of people your age
Mike,
don't.
I mean, when you said to me, could you name 10 people you've interviewed, I could do that. But I have that sort of recall thing. But I mean, what you're hitting on right now is like this whole untapped area. I know you're not surprised to hear this because you've been trying to keep this thing alive for, my God, I don't know how many years. It's so important.
I'd say about, let's see. I'd say about
80, 60?
55 years, 60 years.
I just also want to clear something up because of my naivete. I mean, Bob was a sophisticated music coming in, essentially the decade before major civil rights push. I think a lot of people in the African American and Black communities were very inspired by the music. Like, it was very busy, it was very heady, it was very intellectual. Was there some connotation with stride music that sent us back to the brothels of New Orleans and the sort of ill repute of the word jazz? Was there some kind
I have spent 50 years destroying that bullshit about
destroy it now, man. Please do it, man. Yeah, I will. I mean, go ahead, man. Yeah.
The whorehouses and the picturesque smoky bar. The stride jazz pianists loved classical music. They were they were intellectual.
Wow.
And they wrote songs. They also were good readers, and they didn't play in brothels that much. Maybe they did a little bit when they were young, but of course, because they were black, they couldn't get the main white gigs. But they did have bands. They would play with bands. But again, stride jazz piano style is it's better with a small group rather than a big band. Not only that, in the old days, if you had 10 to 15 musicians and you had a piano, you're going to have trouble projecting that piano with all those other musicians, it would be a little of a problem. Next time you listen to any recording done in the 1920s to the early 30s, when the vocalist comes in, you'll hear the band be quiet and you'll hear the piano accompanying the singer, because they couldn't record all of that at once without getting a jumble. And
I want to go back to because I wanted you to finish this other story about.
Sorry, I'm rambling.
No. I mean, this is perfect. This is exactly what my show is about. Is you talked about these two things that I'm hearing in modern recorded music that are that you wouldn't have heard back in the day. One of them was what you called phase. I can't remember the name of it, but it would be like
a phase cancellation.
Phase cancellation. But what was the other thing that I'm hearing now that is so distasteful compared to what the burning quality of the recordings even when you started to work at RCA?
Well, first of all, you have a transistorized amplification, which is a very, very subtle difference than tube recording.
Totally.
The other thing is, and I used to, they started doing it when I was at RCA, where they would raise the 15,000 cycles EQ, and I called that the Coke mix, because I think that people who were using too much cocaine were having hearing problems, so they'd boost the high end too much, which a lot of them did. Plus, some of the playback equipment you have now have a big boost in high end that maybe is a little bit unnatural. That's part of what you're hearing. But again, digital recording, if I showed you waveforms of tube recording versus digital, you would see that there's a more jagged waveform pattern in the modern stuff. And the other thing is a lot of the younger engineers did not come up recording the way the old guys did. They're getting it now. They're coming back to it a little bit. And they're also reviving old microphone designs.
Can you give some, not necessarily the people, but what are they? Are they miking the room before? How would you talk about what are some of the old characteristics of what those engineers did that you might have even used when you were working on albums that are coming back today?
Well, it's you had less microphones. Of course, a lot of my recordings were 16-track. That meant that we did have 5 mics on the drums, but I even reproduced an engineer sketch on the back of one of Fats Waller's 30s recordings. They used 3 microphones for the whole band.
Oh my gosh!
You've seen? Do you know what an RCA 44 is? It's a old ribbon mic, and if I showed you a picture of it, you've seen it in thousands of Bing Crosby singing into that, and they used one for Fats because it was omnidirectional, meaning it'll pick up both sides rather than one.
What does it sound? Well, by the way, what is that recording? I mean, does it have a lot of brightness to it? The Fats Waller one?
Well, it's not. It's a specific sound. It's not as bright as a Neumann 87 or 67.
Sure.
But it has almost a little bit of a mellow quality. But in most of Fats's recordings with the band, he's using that one mic. One side picks up his piano, and the other side picks up his voice.
I love it. I freaking love it.
Yeah. Then they had a condenser mic, probably a Neumann, or I think Westinghouse or Western Electric made some, and they had one to pick up the drums, and I'm not sure what else. They had another one to pick up the bass and the clarinet or the saxophone or the horn, and that was it. I have an argument sometime there's an audio group on Facebook, and they show you these modern boards where they have maybe 50 faders or more. So I tried them. I said, nobody's going to use that many in one session. You don't have 50 or 100 microphones. You know what I'm saying?
Totally.
And I say that's done to wrongfully impress the custom client.
Exactly,
I used to call
dude.
it the client mix.
Exactly, man.
They had JBL speakers, which I didn't like because they massaged you. They gave me too sexy a sound, and that's not really what was going on the tape.
You were so driven by the style of Stride? I mean, were you able to? A lot of the albums that you produced, I mean, I love them, but they are certainly not Stride albums. Were you?
Not at all. I didn't because it wasn't commercial. I was trying to sell records.
Totally. No. I mean, I'm just wondering I interviewed Hyman a couple years ago, and that guy was doing like double organ duos in Harlem, and obviously he was in the studio scene, and he definitely played some. I mean, he was, he did the Minotaur, he was doing the Moog stuff. Did you find yourself adapting well to bop or even early fusion music?
No, I was hired. No, I wasn't hired, but they asked me to do the fusion records when they were selling in the 70s at RCA. No, I liked doing not only that. Being a musician, I knew which musicians to listen to get. And in New York, there was a group of musicians who did the Motown or soul type background, and I hired them, and then
and who was that? Like Purdy and those cats, or Warren Smith?
Yeah, and Steve Gadd, and God,
was it Richard T, and
yeah. So that exactly those.
Yeah. Oh my God, those guys. Yeah. Those guys can do anything.
The ones that work for Atlantic.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. And
but I'm even talking like, I mean, how did you wind up producing Papa John Creech?
Oh, I didn't produce that. I was at RCA, and then I stupidly left to go help the Jefferson Starship form their record company.
Hold on. I know this is. Do not say stupid. Jefferson Airplane, before they went to Starship, and so it was Grunt. How did you connect with those guys? How did you connect with them originally?
There were two reasons. I was reissuing records on the Vintage series. I did 65 or 63 Vintage series records, everything from Ellington to jug bands to Women of the Blues. That was one of them. And Marty Ballin, who liked the old music and formed the Jefferson Airplane, got this record, and he immediately wanted to get to know me. So one of my advantages as a producer, staff producer at RCA, is I knew engineering and I knew music. I was a musician, and they liked that rather than in those days some of the executives who were mainly suits. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, totally. Knew nothing about the process or anything about the music. Yeah.
No. A lot of them didn't. Yeah. A lot of them I liked as people. They were friends.
Sure.
And I missed them, but.
Well, there was a period of time in music that you went through where those cats stayed out of the way. They were making music, they were making money, but they let the people that knew what they were doing do what they were doing. The problem today is that you have bean counters trying to do stuff that Mike Lipskin was doing, and that's why it's a train wreck.
Well, they had bean counters then. They did
have bean counters. They let the people.
How many record producers does it take to change a light bulb?
I don't know.
I don't know. What do you think?
What record? First of all, Marty Ballin was a dear friend. Rest in peace. I had a chance to do a great interview with him. What record did he hear?
He was wonderful.
He was the man, dude. What record did he hear that he got hip to you?
It was a LP vintage, Women of the Blues.
Holy shit!
And I had stuff from the 20s, Victoria Spivey. God, I can't remember. I had about 4 or 5 of these different women singers because RCA, Victor, and Columbia, and the other record companies had what they called in those days a race series that included Chinese records, Spanish records, and black records, and they would sell these products in the various areas that were segregated, to Chinese or black areas, stuff like that. So these recordings were made by pioneer Ralph Peer. That's a whole other subject. At Victor. So I just put that together because I thought it would make a good historic. And Marty heard it, and then he saw my name on, because my name as producer was in all of them, so he wanted to meet me, and we became friends. We became close friends. I lived with him for a year. There were 2 problems. He, like a lot of them, I'm in New York, want to get things done. And he wanted to sit and get stoned for maybe 6 weeks before we'd go in the studio. And
I'm sorry, I would love to have video of the interactions with you being irascible. And by the way, there's Marnie Smith, Sweet Peas, Lizzie Miles, Manette Moore, Sippy Wallace.
Yeah,
This is all the stuff,
the
cats you recorded. Anyway, so there was a tempo problem with you and Balin, because Balin wanted to just get stoned.
It was almost more sociological.
Yeah.
We remained great friends, but there was another musical problem. He was a singer, and he was a brilliant singer who came from black singing, but technically, he wanted to combine my stride jazz piano with R&B, and beat-wise, it just wasn't going to work.
Wow!
I tried it, but it wouldn't work at all. Yeah, that's what he wanted to do, and the reason he wanted to do it, he was having trouble with Bill Thompson, the manager, and Paul Kantner, and the other musicians in the band. He was moving away from them, and he didn't like the direction that the band was going, and he didn't like the manager, Bill Thompson, anymore. So he wanted me to form a new band with him. That was partly the idea to go away from this starship or the airplane. And
so can you play? I mean, it does say you produced this album, Papa John Creech.
I didn't. Oh no, but I played on it.
Yeah, I mean, you played everything. It says you played organ, synth.
And piano.
Production.
Well, see, Papa John Creech was he was from an earlier generation. He knew all the old tunes that I played. We would jam, and we would play songs from the 30s. Not what he did was he knew he got a gravy train that they liked him, so he'd do what they wanted. Sort of pyrotechnics on the violin.
Wait, hold on for a second. He just you and Papa John played the fiddle.
Yeah.
I mean, he could play stride, that kind of groove.
Not stride. Stride jazz piano uses all the great repertoire from the 20s to the 40s. In fact, I also adapt Beatles tunes to stride jazz piano. It depends upon the type of song. So when he came, before they saw him in some bar in L.A., and they fell in love with his playing, and they thought, wouldn't it be great to have this black violinist in our band? And he I think he jammed with Jack and Jorma, the bass and the
no, it's funny. It's so
guitarist.
great because I interviewed Jorma a while ago, and he said that they saw him in a bar in Huntington Beach
Exactly.
or something, and it was Covington and Jack, and they were like, we got to hang with this cat, we got to jam with him.
Exactly, and they did, because he was very flexible, But when I would play with him, we'd do Fats Waller tunes, we'd do Gershwin tunes.
Oh, that
do
is
all
so.
of that
Do
stuff.
you have tapes of that? I mean, that is magical, man. That is
I'm not
magic.
sure. I
And
don't know if
but
I
he
have
was not
tapes.
from the. Where was he originally from? Was he from California, or where was he from?
I don't know, but he was from that generation,
Wow. Yeah, he certainly
the
was.
the swing generation.
So Ballin put together a package and actually gave you money to start to help work with grunge.
No, we never.
No.
No, he didn't. No, no. Bill Thompson, the manager of the Airplane,
Yeah.
wanted to form a record label for RCA. So RCA financed the whole thing. The problem is Thompson, he's dead, so I can say this. He was a nice guy, but like most of them, he gets stoned. So he wanted to be the head of a record company, but I could only get a decision out of him for anything at 11:30 in the morning before he got stoned. And then the rest of the day was just ridiculousness.
Wow, Lipskin losing his mind with this insane riffraff. Did you move to? I mean, because did you?
Yeah, I moved there to live with Marty Ballin in Marin County for a year.
Oh my gosh, I need.
Yeah.
Now aside from the? So did you find any? What was the highlight of that trip? Obviously, you weren't getting freaking stoned with those guys, but I mean that was a hotbed of musical activity there with all sorts of different cats.
Well, it was, but it was so far away from Stride Jazz Piano.
Mm-hmm.
They liked my playing and everything, and I would get gigs by myself. But
where would you play? Where would you? That's so fascinating. I mean, I know that early '70s pocket. What kind of gigs would you? Where were the gigs?
Oh, there were little gigs at clubs in San Rafael, the city,
In Berkeley.
Yeah, that sort of thing.
Coffee houses. I mean, and so that was my point, is that you respected and appreciated and were trying to sell records for RCA, but you never really dug playing the styles like bop or rock or in that, like you weren't.
Well, I can. That's not. It's not.
No, I know you can. No, what I'm saying is like, because I know Marty left the Airplane and then put together this band called Grootna, which is like this electric.
Grootna, Grootna.
That is it. And
I was in the middle of that.
Are you kidding me, dude? Oh, I've been looking for that album.
I negotiated a contract. He wanted Bill Graham to manage them, and Bill and I became friends because I spent hours negotiating with him.
Tell me about what that would look like. You guys would get some cannolis and coffee, or what? How would that work?
No,
Bill wasn't
we'd be in the office. We'd be in the office with the band, and Marty had his girlfriend be the manager, and she didn't know the first thing about being a manager. But a lot of people in those days didn't know, especially in Mill Valley and San Francisco. Many of the lawyers who represented them because they were drug defense lawyers. They didn't know anything about publishing or copyrights or any of that stuff.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and there was one lawyer at one point that there were 3 record companies trying to get to sign Marty's group, Grootna. That's how I become very close friends with Jerry Wexler. That's a whole other story.
Wow.
But anyway, even Clive Davis came from Columbia to Marty's house to negotiate, and so did Jerry, and Mo Austin came.
Wow.
But they got Mo Austin so stoned that he just left. And Mo Austin was a great guy. He was a wonderful person.
Lipskin, man, I can't believe you were in this milieu, man. I really would not. I mean,
I was in the middle of the record business. I knew most of the people. There's a whole other side. I'm working on an autobiography now, but I started when I started at RCA in '64. there were still engineers who'd worked there in World War I times. So I got to interview them about the recording techniques and shit like that. And then there was publishing. I got to know the old publishers, the old musicians. There are all sorts of stories about this that, I don't want to go far afield because we were talking about stride jazz piano.
No, but I mean, that's what you, my show is, my hope is that we can walk out of this session and you'll have a couple of new stories for that autobiography that you maybe haven't thought about. I mean, that's, to me, it's like, were you doing, when you got there in 1964, I know...
I was 21 years old then.
Paul Desmond, do you remember the first session that you... Paul Desmond was with Jim Hall. I'm just trying to think about RCA at that time. Do you remember some of the early sessions that you were on? The first one, at least at All Music, says that. Well, you did some.
Well, I'll tell you what. Yeah. I'll tell you what. Miraculously, I was blessed with an ability to instinctively edit. Now. Brad McEwen was a record producer. He's been in the field. And the first session I was on, there were two of them, Up to Date with Earl Hines, where he had Aaron Bell, he had Ray Nance, a wonderful saxophone player, Bud Johnson, B-U-D-D,
wow.
Johnson, who was one of the incredible sax players. And that we did that, and then he signed a guy named Rod Levitt. And they were trying to edit two takes. Both he and the engineer got completely lost. And, I'm 21 years old, and for some reason I was able to put the editing back together.
Damn.
And save the spot. It was an instinctive thing. I've always been good at editing.
Yeah, totally.
And you have to be careful because you want to make sure, if you don't know how to edit, you'll hear an interruption or a break in the beat. And you don't want that.
At that point, though, terrible. They were like, "This cat knows what he's got some gold." Then you were full on at that point.
Yeah, well, I even went up to Harlem where Willie the Lion had a session, and his producer was a wonderful guy named Dick Levy, who was the son of a guy named Ike Levy, who was co-founder of CBS radio. So it's the side of stuff we're talking about.
It says Memoirs of Willie the Lion Smith, 1968. Do you think that was that because the next thing is Hair, assistant producer, Disinherited, 1970, and then the next one is Piecing It All Together, Lighthouse producer. Was there, but in between 65 to 66?
I was a co-producer of Hair, but I wasn't involved as a producer in the other stuff.
It says Piecing It Together, Lighthouse producer.
Does it have me as a producer there?
Absolutely, it does. Well, that's the Skip Propek.
Oh,
that was Skip Propek.
Lighthouse. Yeah, that's right, Lighthouse.
And you are assistant producer on Hair.
Yeah, I produced that, yeah.
68 was Memoirs of Willie the Lion Smith, and then 66, The Best of Porter Wagoner. But do you have any memory of sessions you were on from roughly 65 through 67?
You're talking about as a producer?
Yeah.
Oh, sure. The ones with Brad McEwen, who became the head of the jazz subdivision of RCA, Rod Levitt, this Earl Hines record, and then I came back to RCA in '74. Ken Glancy hired me at the suggestion of John Hammond, and that's when I produced. I produced the Fusion records, and I produced a record that he wouldn't issue, Guy Clark, and I'd made a deal with him that if he was going to have hits, I would have to use the Memphis rhythm section with him. The rhythm section that just had done Elvis Presley's In the Ghetto, the same rhythm section had all the Neil Diamond hits and B.J. Thomas hits. the same rhythm section that Chips Moman had in his studio.
Oh my God! You're talking about the. Now you're talking
Reggie Young guitar.
Sure. Well, it was a pig, and then
no, Pig is different.
You thinking
yeah,
no, I know. And then
player?
there was one.
Yeah, that's he's completely different. He was country.
Totally. I mean, this is unbelievable stuff. I mean, I have to ask you about guys like Mingus, Max Roach. Did you?
Oh, there are funny stories.
Go ahead.
Max Roach, I jammed with, and he was beautiful. I jammed with him at the Newport Jazz Festival, and he was very nice, quiet person. Mingus, I never had anything to do with, but he had a reputation for being irascible.
Oh yeah.
He once fired Jackie Byard right on the stand.
Yeah, no, I mean, dude, Charles McPherson told me that he at a club, the Mafia, it was a mafia-run club, and they owed Mingus a couple $1,000, and they didn't have it after the gig. Mingus took the strings and the piano, and those are strong. He ripped them out of the piano.
He was big guy.
Big guy, and then he tried to kill. Then he challenged Eric Dolphy to a knife fight because Dolphy told him he was leaving the band. and the guy was. I mean, was there like?
Well, the story I have about him is, for some reason, he was doing a custom record. It was not RCA, or maybe it was. I think George Avakian had hired him for a gig. And there was a little engineer, short engineer, very, very good, named Mickey Crawford. But the shorter the engineer, sometimes the more they try to be a salesman.
Napoleon complex, yeah.
Yeah. And he was wonderful. I love Mickey Crawford. He was a great engineer, but he was starting to pull the jive thing on Mingus. And Mingus was twice his size, and he said, "Look, little man, I want you to put those pieces of adhesive tape where I tell you."
Before we wrap up set one, we're going to have to do set two. Before we wrap up set one, I mean, it's so funny because a couple things. Did you see some of these Ween festivals? He included guys like T-Bone Walker, some of the blues cats. Did you get to?
Oh, those were he had the folk. Those I think those were on the folk.
You're
festival.
absolutely right. Were you?
Yeah. No. He was a friend, and I saw all that stuff in the backstage thing of that. But I saw a lot of those.
I was just curious about, like, here's another album that you worked on that is the farthest thing from Stride, but I mean, it involves a stone genius. Well, you and Gil Evans working on that music of Jimi Hendrix.
Oh, that was a nightmare.
That was a nightmare.
The reason it was is Gil Evans, he was doing coke and he was doing marijuana, and he in every session you always have to find out who the artist wants. I said, "Who do you want? What's the instrumentation? Just tell me." He's going to have 2 synthesizers, and he wanted to have 2 drummers, which to me is a terrible idea in any session. Just that's rhythmic suicide.
Yeah, that's like it's like shoes in a dryer or something.
Oh, yeah. God, thank you. Yeah. And so I think we had 20 musicians. Now, what happens is, at the session, other musicians show up that I hadn't contracted for, and we couldn't record because in those days, the inputs in the board were maybe 30. So I think it was 30 inputs. And I said to myself, as the producer and as an officer of RCA, I told the extra musicians, "I'm very sorry, we're not going to pay you. You can't be on the sessions." And I became his mortal enemy after that because I was not allowing him to do what he wanted, when technically it was impossible.
What did he want you to
record
do?
that many people?
Yeah, I mean, that's
use too many musicians in the gig that we hadn't planned for. and he had to record live because of the number of people he had in the budget. So, say we had 20 musicians, he wanted 10 more. We didn't have the sound facility to record them.
I wish I hadn't brought that up.
No, I don't care.
You know, I mean, I just, Mike, it's like, it's so beautiful that, I mean, I know it's not your real birthday, but I have to say, like, to connect with you at this time in my life, like 11 years into my program, completely different modalities in some ways, but I do feel that you are a link in this chain of the lineage of going back to those early 50s days when you were recording these guys and getting to know these guys and preserving and promoting their legacies and through these interviews, bringing the voice to light and bringing the stories to light. That's all I'm trying to do for my daughters and future generations, is to promote how real music is made. It's all music, and
well, what's good about you is that you're one of the few that has a sense of history, and you're trying to do the same thing. You're aware of our beautiful history of recording that goes back to 1900 or earlier, and you sense how beautiful the evolution of it is, both musically and these funny little stories that happen in production.
And you know what? I mean, you are a gateway into a completely different vector. So it's just, well, let's do set two down. In the next couple of months. Do you have any idea when your book might be coming out?
Oh,
it's a work in progress. It's a work in progress.
It's working. Unfortunately, I'm lazy.
You know what, man? It was. I had such a ball. So let's do this again real soon. We got more to do.
You call me, and now, are you in New York?
I'm a New Yorker, but I live in Tucson, Arizona.
Oh, okay, because it would be nice to hang with you sometime, but I live part-time in Kingman, Arizona. But
in Kingman? When are you out in Kingman? Wait, where are you in New York?
No, I'm in San Francisco right now.
Okay, so
I have my gigs.
I will be in the Bay Area at the end of February, the last week. So maybe we can link up and do a video interview. It'd be fun.
Oh, well, I'd love to hang out with you anyway. That would be fun.
Yeah,
too.
No, there's a lot of.
You're intelligent. You're aware, and you ask good questions, and you're sort of refreshing in that regard.
Yeah, no, I'm like a blind monk stumbling into grace, like Ralph Gleason.
He was a friend too.
I know. No, I mean you're connected to all these people, and like just the fact that you were close with Marty Bound. Like I didn't meet Marty, but we had such a great hang, and he wound up in my.
Well, you would, because of the way you're respected, and you're not dumb.
Thank you, Mike. I had a ball, man. I'll get this up later tonight. Probably start transcribing these stories, and just like the ones that you've been commenting on over the time. I appreciate your support, man. It's been great to hang.
Okay, call me again.
All right, dude. Be cool, man.
Take care. Be well.
Later. Bye. Always learning and always growing. Great hang with Mike Lipskin. That's it for the Jake Feinberg Show, and we'll see you tomorrow.